We all dream of winning the lottery. We imagine that if we just had enough money, all our problems would vanish. We could buy whatever we want, stop working, and live like kings. But history teaches us a darker lesson. That sudden, unearned wealth is not a blessing. It is a virus. This is the story of the Spanish Empire in the 16th century. They didn't just win the lottery, they found the bank. They discovered the largest source of silver the world had ever seen and became the masters of the earth, the first empire on which the sun never set. They had the best army, the biggest ships, and a direct line to God. And then they watched it all burn. They learned the hardest lesson in economics, that gold is not wealth. Gold is a drug, and Spain was about to overdose. To understand this tragedy, we must travel back to a barren, freezing plateau high in the Andes Mountains of modern-day Bolivia. The year is 1545. The location is Potosi. Before this moment, Spain was a powerful nation, but it was not economically invincible. They were a society of warriors, deeply religious and hardened by war, valuing the sword over the ledger. But everything changed when a local indigenous man named Diego Gualpa stumbled while chasing a llama. To catch his balance, he grabbed a bush, and when the roots pulled away from the earth, he saw it, shimmering veins of pure silver. He had found the Cerro Rico, the rich hill. It was a geological freak of nature. It wasn't just a mine. The mountain was practically made of solid silver ore. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes. This was the El Dorado they had been searching for. They immediately set to work, and Potosi transformed from a desolate wasteland into one of the largest cities in the world. Within a few decades, it had a population larger than London or Paris. It was a city of greed, violence, and unimaginable wealth. But beneath the shimmering surface of those silver bars, the foundation of the Spanish Empire was already beginning to rot. To the rest of Europe, Spain looked like a god. While other kings were counting pennies to pay for small border skirmishes, the Spanish monarchs were playing with the house's money. By the mid-1500s, Spain had become the first truly global superpower, a colossus that bestrode the world, from the palaces of Madrid to the jungles of the Philippines. They had the tercios, the most feared infantry on the planet, and a navy that turned the Atlantic into a Spanish lake. But if you looked past the shimmering gold leaf on the cathedrals and into the ledger books of the common man, you would see a different story. Spain was falling for a deadly economic trap. They were confusing money with wealth. Wealth is the ability to produce, to grow food, to weave cloth, to build ships. Money is just the paper, or in this case the silver, that represents it. Because Spain had found infinite money in the mountains of Bolivia, they decided they no longer needed to produce anything else. Imagine a shoemaker in Seville in 1550. Business is booming because the city is flooded with silver from the latest treasure fleet. But because everyone has pockets full of silver, the price of leather goes up, the price of bread goes up, the price of rent goes up. This was the price revolution, the first great inflationary crisis of the modern world. In a century where prices were usually flat, Spanish prices skyrocketed by 400%. The result was a hollow economy. Because inflation made everything in Spain so expensive, it became cheaper for a Spaniard to buy shoes from France or cloth from England than to buy them from his own neighbor. Spain became a funnel. The silver would arrive in Seville, and within weeks it would flow straight out of the country to pay for imports from Spain's rivals. As the saying went at the time, Spain is the mouth that receives the food, chewing it for the rest of Europe. They were doing the hard, bloody work of empire, only to hand the profits to the very nations that wanted to see them fail. The tragedy of the Spanish Empire was that its king, Philip II, did not just want to be rich, he wanted to be the sword of God. From his gloomy palace at El Escorial, he managed a global map that was increasingly expensive to maintain. He believed it was his divine duty to defend Catholicism against the Protestant Reformation and the expanding Ottoman Turks. This meant Spain was forced to fight everyone, everywhere, all the time. But wars are not won by faith alone, they are won by logistics and coin. Because Spanish industry had been hollowed out by inflation, the empire couldn't even manufacture its own weapons. Spain was often forced to buy gunpowder and cannons from foreign merchants, sometimes even from the very Dutch rebels they were trying to suppress. The silver from Potosi was literally funding the enemies of Spain. To fund these wars of ego, Philip II made a fatal financial calculation. He began spending the silver before it even reached the port. He turned to German and Genoese bankers for asientos, short-term, high-interest loans that were essentially imperial payday loans. He would mortgage the next year's treasure fleet to pay for this year's army. The most famous example of this reckless gambling was the Spanish Armada of 1588. It was the most expensive naval force ever assembled, funded almost entirely on credit. When storms and English fire ships sent half that fleet to the bottom of the ocean, the investment vanished, but the debt remained. By the 1570s, the interest payments on the national debt were larger than the entire tax revenue of the empire. Spain wasn't paying down its principal. It was barely treading water, borrowing more money just to pay off the interest on old loans. The masters of the world had become slaves to their own creditors. We tend to think of a country going bankrupt as a modern phenomenon, something that happens to Greece or Venezuela. But Philip II of Spain was the father of the sovereign default. He did it bigger and louder than anyone else in history. The breaking point arrived in 1557. The relentless wars in France and the Netherlands had drained every corner of the treasury. And then, the unthinkable happened. The treasure fleet was slightly delayed. The delicate house of cards collapsed. The bankers, sensing the end, refused to lend another single coin. In a moment that sent shockwaves through the world, Philip II stood before his court and issued a royal decree. Spain was suspending all payments to its creditors. He looked at the most powerful financial houses in Europe and simply told them, "I'm not paying you." It was a financial earthquake. In Antwerp and Genoa, banks collapsed overnight, and wealthy families lost everything. It was the 16th century equivalent of the 2008 financial crisis, caused by the pen of one man. But here's the tragedy. The bankruptcy didn't stop the spending. It only made it more expensive. Because Spain was addicted to war and addicted to imports, they had to keep borrowing. The bankers eventually returned, but now they charged predatory interest rates to account for the risk. Spain entered a generational death spiral: borrow, spend, crash, repeat. The empire defaulted again in 1575, 1596, 1607, 1627, and 1647. Back home, the impact was horrific. When the king couldn't pay his soldiers, they mutinied, famously sacking the city of Antwerp in a Spanish fury that destroyed the financial center of northern Europe. To save himself, the king began to debase the currency, minting worthless copper coins called vellon, and forcing the people to accept them as if they were silver. It was a hidden tax that wiped out the middle class and left the poor trading worthless tokens while the rich hoarded what little real silver remained. By the late 17th century, the transformation was complete. Spain had gone from the world's creditor to its greatest cautionary tale. The fields of Castile, once the breadbasket of the peninsula, lay fallow because it was no longer profitable to farm. The cities emptied as the middle class, the merchants and artisans vanished, replaced by a tiny, ultra-wealthy elite and a massive, starving underclass. Spain had become the sick man of Europe, a hollowed-out giant that still wore the crown of empire but had no muscles left to move. The ultimate irony of this history is where the silver actually went. It didn't vanish, it simply migrated. The silver of Potosi flowed through Spain and settled in the vaults of London, Amsterdam, and Paris. The very nations that Spain fought for centuries used that silver to fund their own industrial revolutions. They used Spanish capital to build the stock exchanges, the merchant fleets, and the scientific laboratories that would define the modern world. Spain was merely the conduit, the funnel through which the wealth of the Americas flowed to build the future of its rivals. The story of the Spanish Empire is the ultimate warning for any nation today. It is the story of the resource curse. Whether it is silver in 1550 or oil and gas in the 21st century, easy money is a siren song. It breaks the link between work and reward. It convinces leaders that they can buy prosperity rather than building it. It creates the illusion of strength while the foundation is being eaten by the rot of inflation and debt. Spain drowned in gold. They thought they were the masters of their destiny because they had the most money. But they learned too late that real power doesn't come from what you dig out of the ground. It comes from the productivity of your people and the health of your ledgers. They were the masters of the earth, yet they died as slaves to their own fortune. This is the Wealth History Tales channel. Subscribe now to stay ahead of the curve, because when the history books are written, you'll want to be among the few who saw the collapse coming. History never repeats exactly, but it always rhymes. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.